everyone, this is Shamvi from Designhill and your host for today. I hope you and your families are keeping well and safe, taking all the precautions and taking care of your near and dear ones. Welcome again to yet another event by Designhill, and today we will be discussing and learning about the smart ways to build a listener, especially when it's your first podcast show. This event is brought to you by Designhill, world's leading creative marketplace that caters to the creative needs of businesses and individuals alike who can source high-quality designs from professional designers through its print-on-demand marketplace called Print Shop by Designhill. You can also buy 50-plus unique products with thousands of artworks created by a world-class community of independent artists. So moving ahead, let me introduce you to our special speakers for today. We have with us Bruce. Bruce is the host of Now Hear This Entertainment podcast. This show has gotten listeners from 155 countries around the world. He is also the president of Now Hear This Incorporation, which provides management, publicity, and related services to the clients. Bruce has also been a speaker at numerous broadcasting events around the United States. Bruce, would you like to say a quick hi to the audience?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being on here, and thank you to Designhill for asking me to participate. I'm looking forward to sharing lots of podcast tips throughout the next 45 to 60 minutes.
Thank you so much, Bruce, for being here. Up next, we have Paul. Paul is a podcaster and entrepreneur himself. He has consulted extensively in so many films, marketing, and political arenas. He's also the host of a very, very interesting podcast show, Compelled, a podcast telling unique stories about God working through people's life. Paul?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really excited to join you guys. And I'm coming from Austin, Texas. So if you guys know where Texas is, that's where I live.
Welcome, Paul. Next up, we have Tizer. Tizer is a corporate sales professional who has worked with 3 Fortune 500 companies and is nationally recognized as a top salesperson and manager in his industry. Tizer, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. I'm also dialing in from Texas. So Paul and I are your local Texans.
Yay! So happy to have you all here. Thank you so much, guys, for taking out time from your busy schedule and joining us today for this panel discussion. It's an honor to have you all here with us. And a big thank you to Designhill events team for putting up such amazing set of panelists. Great, so before we start the session, here's a big announcement. We are giving away certificates to all the attendees who will stick till the end. So guys, you just can't miss the chance, so stay tuned till the very end. Also, you guys can take a screenshot of this event and post it on your Twitter accounts. Use the hashtag Designhill Events, tag DesignhillDH, and all our speakers whose Twitter handles will be in the chat section on the right just in a while. One lucky winner will have a chance to win Print Shop gift card worth $50. All right, so before we start the session, let's quickly look at what Designhill is all about.
Looking to bring your branding out of the 80s? Head to the world's #1 creative marketplace, Designhill.
When I wanted to grow my parents' restaurant business, I knew we needed a better logo than the one my Uncle Sonny drew back in the 1980s. That's why I went to Designhill and got an incredible logo and brand identity that met all my needs within my small budget. The process was easy. I just went to Designhill's marketplace to choose from one of their incredible professional designers. Find one you like based on their style. Oh, this one looks interesting. Check the ratings and reviews to see how other people like their work. Oh, seems like he's worked at restaurants before. Then add some information about your business. Do you have a slogan? Where's the logo gonna appear? What colors do you need? Then your designer will get to work delivering you an incredible logo. You can even find an expert to design any kind of graphic design, from packaging to menus to t-shirts to business cards. I got everything. And now with the help of Designhill, I have everything I need to take my business to the next level and leave the 80s where they belong. It's real. Mom and Dad are so proud. Maybe we can open up a second location, or a third, or a fourth, or let's just go global.
Let the world know it's real and build your brand with Designhill.
All right, so that was all about Design Hill, and now we are all set to start the session. We will be taking up questions, guys, during the session. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the questions tab so that those questions don't get missed out. And yeah, so let's get started. So my first question for this panel discussion goes to Tizer. Let's start with you. So the first question is, the growth in audiobooks and podcasts is a part of a larger trend. So what's so special about listening?
I think we've just found a new way to meet people where they're at. You know, I think that you can see Paul's got some books behind him. I've got some books behind me. I'm an avid reader, but that's not the way that everybody likes to consume content or learn content. I think podcast has been a great way and shows how much people want to have a longer format discussion or consume information in a way that they can learn it a little bit better on the move, right? You know, we know that Zig used to talk about, and Jim Rohn talk about, the Automobile University. So it gives people a chance to listen and tune in from wherever they're at and consume information in a different way.
Yeah, right. Paul, what's your viewpoint on this? Why listening is so special?
Yeah, I think that I think there's this fundamental shift, which is that a lot of people are multitasking, and I think that's something that's a fundamental shift to stay here forever. So when people watch video content, you can't really multitask the same way that you can when you listen to audio. For instance, if I drive, people are going to keep driving their own cars for a long time, right? Self-driving vehicles will be here someday, but it's going to be a long time before that happens. And as long as people continue multitasking, audio consumption is always going to remain a fundamental way that we consume stuff. So I think the shift from radio to podcasts, there's a difference in technology, but the audio consumption is still the same. So I think the shift is here to stay for quite some time.
Yeah, right. Bruce, any pointers to add through?
No, I was just going to say that I feel like, especially with what you just saw me do here, putting in earbuds, I think it's a very intimate connection that can be made, is when somebody has you as a podcaster, has your voice right here, that they're really, truly interested in what you have to say. And as Paul said, driving is certainly one of the experiences where we listen because you have the car radio on, or you're streaming something through your phone, your Bluetooth. But I think when people choose to wear earbuds, it shows that they're truly committed. They genuinely want to hear what you have to say. And I think that's something that as podcasters, we kind of think about in the sense of, okay, this only inspires me to really want my content to be that much more meaningful to those that have chosen to say, this is how personal I want to get with you, Mr. or Ms. Host.
Right. So the key takeaway on this is that, the most sense of trust is built up. That connection gets built up. So great. Wow. That's why listening is so special. So I'll move on to my next question. Let me get this question to Bruce. So do you think a great podcast requires a host talent, Bruce? Since you have been running a podcast for years now, and also do share a checklist on how to create a top podcast.
I think it takes some time to become a host in the sense of figuring out what your personality is going to be. I've been doing my show every week for more than 7 years. I have a second podcast that I've been doing every week for more than 2 years. And it's part of the preparation. When you talk about a checklist, I think what gets overlooked is, I don't want to say who am I going to be on the show, because you really want to be yourself, because it's too difficult to be a phony and try to keep up an act throughout the whole podcast episode, not to mention episode after episode. But you do have to figure out, where am I coming at this from? In the case of my Now Hear This Entertainment podcast, I launched that out of my business. And so I thought, I want the Bruce who runs Now Hear This Incorporated to be the voice that people hear on the Now Hear This Entertainment podcast, so they know what qualifies me to be speaking about the entertainment business. And I want them to know, okay, this guy runs a business where he's promoting and managing artists, and that's where he's coming from with the content that he's giving us in terms of the conversations that he's having with these performers each week. On my Catholic Sports Radio podcast, it's different there. That's Bruce more of, I want them to see the person that I am, because there's a little bit of an element that goes into the background that I have professionally, but it's really more about myself as a person and the way that my faith life has been. And so that's kind of where you get your checklist started. There's other things on the checklist, and I want to give the other guys a chance to talk, but I think one of the key things that really has to be on your checklist is plan out those first 10, 12, 15 episodes before you ever even hit record on your very first episode, because otherwise you get so excited, you put so much time and effort into launching that first episode, and all of a sudden you say, oh my gosh, now I need to get, what am I going to do for episode 2? Or you have an idea for the first 2, 3, 4 episodes, and then you say, I have no idea what I'm doing after this. If you plan out your first 10, 12, 15 episodes, you can breathe a lot easier, because it is so overwhelming to start a podcast. That's one major thing you can push to the side and say, okay, I can ease into this. I can figure out who I'm going to be. I can do all the other elements that I know that Paul and Tizer are going to talk about. But it's a huge weight off your shoulders to know that you've already got those ready.
Absolutely right. Absolutely. Planning is the key, guys. Paul, your take. You are also a podcaster, podcasting regularly. So how do you think a great podcast requires a great host talent?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, at least in our situation with the Compelled podcast, we have a great team of people who I work with. So, I'm the host, but we actually have an editor that I work with. So every single interview that I do, we don't release them live. So I record the interview, and then I send it back to my editor, and then he and I will actually plan out, like, hey, we'll look through the entire transcript of the podcast, and then he and I will plan out, like, hey, these were the best moments, these are the worst moments. And so then we'll edit it together. And so normally we'll transcribe everything, drop that into a spreadsheet, and then kind of look at section by section. So, people listen to me on our podcast and think like, wow, Paul, you're such a great speaker. You always have great things to say. But the truth is that they're just hearing the best side of me, because actually, I'm mumbling over all of my words. I'm stumbling. I have like mental gaps. And so we're editing down like a 2-hour interview into like the best 45 minutes. So one of our tips is that, like, I'm not a naturally gifted speaker in the way that some people are. But I have a great team that I work with. So that's one tip I would say is, like, hey, see if you can work with the team. So if you're launching a podcast for your company per se, I would encourage you, don't think that you're just going to be so magnetic and have such an incredible personality and that you're just going to be on with it and people are going to enjoy listening to everything you have to say. I would say if you have the budget, go ahead and plan on hiring an editor to work with you. And then the second thing I would say is make sure to be natural when you're having your interviews. So it's incredible that, when we have a podcast interview, you're only hearing someone's audio in your ears. But when you speak, if you talk with your hands, right? Say I'm talking with my hands right now and I'm smiling as I speak, right? But if someone frowns while they talk and they're really serious, that conveys in their voice, right? And if they're like locking their arms, and really rigid. So instead you need to speak really naturally, conversationally, and that will convey itself in the audio as well. So that's a little power tip for those listening.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely. That connection building is very, very important. The more natural you are on the podcast, the more connection you would build. Tizer, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think that people think you have to have these certain type of attributes or skills in order to start hosting a podcast or have a podcast. I was just a sales guy who said, hey, I want to help other sales guys and women. And so I just, hopped on and kind of started doing my thing. So I don't think it requires any level of talent. I think that, like anything in life, that you should actively seek to try to get better, be self-critical, analyze kind of what Paul was talking about. I don't have such a structured policy like he does, but I'll go back and listen and go, okay, well, I could have gotten better. I should have been more prepared. I could have asked better strategic questions. And then so I'm just self-critical with going back and listening. And then kind of what Bruce was talking about, obviously creating content schedule so you don't fall behind and you can start to stay consistent is really important. And for me, one of the things, I'm really busy. It's like I'm a VP for an insurance company. I do some consulting. I help my father-in-law with his businesses. My wife owns a business. I have the 2 podcasts, right? So what I'll do is on a day off sometimes, which is rare, I'll record 7 or 8 podcasts all in one day. So I sit down, I just bulk out my content so that I don't have to stress about it if I'm going to be traveling or working for the next 2 or 3 weeks and I won't be able to record. So that's really helped me.
Right. So great. So that brings me to actually my next question. As Bruce and Tizer says that planning everything is important in a way. Just plan your things, just plan your content. So that brings me to another question. Why content roadmap is so critical for success in any podcast, in any podcast show, say in podcast industry, and how to create a content marketing plan that converts to real customers through podcasts.
Yeah. Can I take that one?
Yes, please go ahead, Paul.
Awesome. Well, 2 things that come to mind immediately, and I could just kind of speak from my personal experience. Actually, 3 things. The first one is that, at least with our show, so we have a very highly produced podcast. So we spend a lot of time. We spend probably around 40 hours creating each episode. So it's a very highly produced show, similar to like a lot of NPR style shows. And so for us, content mapping is like super important. And so what we'll do is we'll have a seasonal model because, we've recognized that there's no way that we can release an episode every single week because we just don't have enough bandwidth. We don't have the budget. We don't have enough team members for that yet. So maybe someday. So we'll release a season at a time. And so I'll sit down, I'll say like, hey, for this year, here are the 2 seasons that we're going to have. We're going to have 10 episodes in each season. And then we're very straightforward with our audience saying like, hey, you're listening to season 4 or whatever. And we'll let them know like, hey, this is only a season at a time. And so then the second thing that we'll do is when I'm blocking out an entire season, I'll look through the list of potential guests and stories that we'd like to feature. And then I'll try to make sure like, hey, we don't have too much overlap here. And if I realize like, hey, I thought this particular story was going to be very unique from this other story, but actually once I recorded it, no, they're very similar to 2 stories we were releasing in the same season. So I'll have to bump. So I just did that actually. We recorded 2 episodes. So one of them I'm actually going to have to bump to our next season instead. So now I've got to go find like a brand new story to go and record for that. But then the third thing that I would say is be very choosy about the types of guests that you bring on your show. So you're developing a relationship with your audience. And I know there can be a temptation like, oh, I've got to release an episode every single week. And because you're doing that, your standards for the guests that you bring on your show begin to drop because you're just like hustling and trying to find someone to bring on your show. But what then happens is then you're actually releasing subpar content. And, your listeners, the listeners today have millions of podcast options to choose from. And so unless you are their very favorite show or one of their top very favorite shows, unless you're bringing stellar guests and stellar content every single time, they're going to go find some other show that's bringing really stellar content. Because I guarantee you, someone is out there doing this whole podcasting game better than you are, right? So you've got to compete to have that better edge. So I would encourage people, especially as you're starting out, do a seasonal model instead of a weekly model. And I know Bruce and Tizer might have some thoughts on that. They might do their show differently, but at least for me, that's been something we found really effective for what we're doing.
Yeah, Tizer, would you like to add on?
Yeah, sure. No, I think that's a great idea, Paul. I wish you would have told me that 3 years ago when I started. For me, again, what I do is I sit down and I kind of make this part of my yearly planning. I'm really big into goals and planning all areas of my life. And so podcast is included. I map that out, almost my content an entire year. I was actually and I didn't do this to begin with, but I learned as I went along because in the beginning, I was not as consistent as I should have been, which probably hurt my growth in the beginning. And I end up interviewing a great guy. His name is Brendan. He's got a big YouTube channel. And so I was talking to him afterward about how he does his content creation. And he had his content mapped out through 2024. And I was completely blown away that he had 3 years out every single week he had a topic and he had bullet points, right? He was a young 20-something, so obviously he was not married with kids. But it really kind of gave me this different idea of like, oh, okay, I can take this, how I do my sales goals, right? Or how I plan objectives for my teams. And so then I just mapped out my whole content for the year. So every week I kind of knew what to go in, and then it's analyzing on Sundays. I sit down and kind of map out my week. Okay, where can I fit in the podcast for this week? Because one's an interview style, one's not. So where do I have time for my guest? And it just makes it easier, again, to have that kind of foresight. And for me, long-term planning, it's made me consistent. And then I just have non-negotiable hours on Sunday, because I do all of my own editing, where I sit down for a good chunk of the day, and I know people know not to disturb me, the 4 and 6-year-old little demons I have running around here.
Right, absolutely. Bruce, you want to add to this
Yes.
content roadmap critical for success in the podcast industry?
Yes, I do. Thank you. So I want to give some specific examples to everyone who's on here so that you kind of understand how you can keep the variety so that, as Paul was saying, it doesn't seem repetitive. So in the case of my Now Hear This Entertainment podcast, I do take a look and say, okay, I just had on back-to-back a singer-songwriter from Nashville. So you don't want to fall into that rut where you say, uh-oh, I just had 3 weeks in a row. And some places where you can see this is when you start to write up your episode description. If you find yourself saying the same thing over and over, number one, you don't want to say the same thing over and over, because if someone's scrolling through your list of episodes and it looks like every episode has the same description, they're not going to go into all the details to see what it is about that person. But I challenge myself to make sure, do I have guests that are representing different genres of music? Do I have people from not only different parts of the United States, but from other countries? And so I really try to make sure that there's a variety, because I do.
Uh-oh.
Paul, you want to take over?
Bruce was doing great. I thought what he had to share was awesome. So I was like, wow, what's the clincher there?
Probably his internet got disconnected, and so he should be back. So let me push down to this to next question. Maybe he could take up. Oh, he's there. Yes, Bruce, would you like to continue there?
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Sorry. So this morning I put out episode 388. So on time every week for more than 7.5 years, and always challenging myself to make sure that the guests provide enough of a variety where they can provide content that the listeners can learn from without getting bored and saying, okay, this is kind of like the person last week or 2 weeks ago. And then on the flip side, on my Catholic Sports Radio podcast, I'm looking to see, am I giving people perspectives from different viewpoints? So it might be an athlete one week, it might be a coach one week, it might be a member of the clergy, it might be a referee or an umpire, it might be an administrator. And Tizer said before about doing a non-interview podcast, and that's fine to do, but I think it's the same thing. If you're going to do, say, a marketing podcast, you don't want episode after episode to all kind of be in the same category of marketing. It's such a broad category. You should niche it down as best as you can, so that it's not so broad that people say, well, okay, it's about marketing, but what specifically? But at the same time, you need to make sure that you're giving people different facets of that industry so that they say, okay, I'm going to keep making sure I download every episode that this person puts out, because they always have something different, something creative, something beneficial within their industry that I really want to hear.
Absolutely. So choosing the right topics, that gets me to my another question here. Choosing the right topics is very, very important for your podcast shows. So guys, give us quick tips for choosing the right topics that's unique and original for a podcast show. How to choose it? Paul, let's start with you.
Sure. Okay. Well, so I think there's two things. One is when you're trying to figure out your niche. So like, you might work for a company, and so your company already has this idea of like, hey, we create some type of product. We need to make a podcast. Your job is go make this awesome podcast. And your temptation is going to be like, oh, okay, we're going to like feature all of our products, and it's going to be this very on the nose, this is an American expression, but like very obvious, overt show about our product promoting ourselves. And let me tell you, like, that's going to be really boring. right? Because again, remember, there's so many people out there. They have so many shows to listen from, to choose from, so many podcasts out there. So I was just reading an article earlier today. In fact, I actually do have the link to this. Let me drop it here in the chat. And there is a great graphic that they included
Or
in here.
you can share the link on a CTA button.
Oh yeah, okay, here we go. Let's see here.
For the entire set of audience to receive the resource from you.
Yeah, branded podcast. Okay, here we go. I just sent it. Oh, let's try this again. There we go. There. So if you click on that, that'll take you to an article, and I would definitely click on it now and save it for the future to read after we're done here. But they have a chart there, like a Venn diagram, showing like when you're creating a branded podcast for your company, you've got to find this trifecta of perfection, where it's content that is engaging and interesting and unique, but it also has to be something that your audience, your avatar, your audience avatar is interested in. But then at the very bottom, it also has to fit your business goals, right? And so if you can find something that fits in all three of those areas, then that is the podcast goal. But if you only meet two of those areas and not all three at the same time, your podcast is either going to be very popular with your avatar but not achieve your business goals, or it'll achieve your business goals but it won't be popular with your avatar. No one's going to listen to it, right? So as you think about this, you got to really think through like what are ways that you can create content that is not super on the nose but that is helpful. Okay, but that was for a branded podcast, right? So let's say that you're interested in just podcasting for your own personal needs. You know, like it's just something like I want to create an audience, right? So like what are your goals in that? So one thing I would suggest, and this is something that we did from our show, I was in a space in life where it was like I wanted to create something because I used to create a lot of video content and I wanted to create something, but video was very time consuming. And so I actually looked at the list of resources and relationships that I had. So I took out a piece of paper and I just wrote down for like, I think a whole afternoon, I just started writing down people that I knew, relationships that I had, resources that I had. And as I just began writing everything down, it was just a really great exercise. It kind of came to my realization like, wow, I know a lot of people with these crazy stories about how God has transformed their life. And so that was how we ended up launching Compelled Podcast, because I was like, man, this is super obvious. Like I've got all these very unique relationships. And of course, today, you know, with our shows, we've grown. We no longer just interview people that I knew personally, but that was a great starting point. So that was kind of for us how we chose our show topic.
Right. Tizer, add something to this. Choosing the right topic that's unique and original for a podcast show.
Yeah. So I actually, it's interesting. I started out not ever wanting to do a podcast. I started a YouTube channel. And then I asked somebody hit me up on Instagram and said, hey, can you just make this into a podcast so I can listen to it when I drive? And so I said, sure. But the reason I tell you that was because I was reading this book called Vlog Like a Boss by Amy something. I forget her last name. And in the book, she talked about using buckets to help create your content strategy, right? So the name of my podcast is Grind, Sell, Elevate. And that's very intentional because I was trying to think about how to create content that would flow well. So grind is a bucket. It's about motivation. Selling is about selling, right? Yeah. And then elevating is about life optimization. And then my fourth week, I would do a book review. And so that was kind of my format. So every week I would go in, I go, okay, now I'm going to look for a unique topic about motivation. You know, where have I struggled? So I just go back to my own personal struggles. But I think unique content is subjective, right? You can give me, Paul, and Bruce all the same topic, and we're all going to have different takeaways and have our own spin on it. So, you know, I don't get too caught up in like I have to find the most unique person or talking point in the world. It's just like I'm going to just be authentic and give my take on it. If it resonates with you, cool. If not, oh well. So maybe that's the wrong way of looking at it. That's just the way I go about it. But I felt like those buckets really helped me. Right. And I try to use that same as I train, because people don't know this, but the first 95 episodes I did on Grind, Sell, and Elevate was just me. And then I transitioned into the interview format. So now I try to do that same type of thing with buckets. Like I'll have someone on marketing, then maybe I'll have somebody on conversion, then I'll have somebody on sales. So it just to keep it interesting and fresh from different perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. Bruce?
Yes, I wanted to add that when you first start a podcast, you don't want to go into it with the attitude of, I'm going to try this out and see how it goes. And if I don't really like it, or if it doesn't seem to be going over that well, I'll just pull the plug after 3 or 6 months. You really have to go into it saying, this is something I'm going to do for the long haul. And so as a result, where I'm going with this is, when you're choosing a topic, it better be something that you're going to be able to talk about for the long haul, and not something that you're a little familiar with that you think maybe you could perhaps do a few episodes about. Because if you want to do this month after month, year after year, it has to be something that you're very comfortable talking about and something that you're very knowledgeable in. And then, of course, as I said before, you really want to niche down within that. So if you say, well, I'm going to do a sports podcast, you go, okay, so where are we going with that? What about sports are you going to talk about? Are you going to do it from the fans' perspective? Are you going to try to compete with ESPN and actually report on sports? Is it going to be one sport? Is it going to be all sports? So it has to be something that you're really knowledgeable in and comfortable talking about, and it has to be something that you can niche down so that people will be drawn to it and say, wow, I really love that sport. I love that he has this connection to that sport, and that he's going to be talking about this facet of it, and only that, instead of, well, I really love hockey, but he said he's going to be talking about every sport out there, and guess I just have to hope that once in a while he talks about hockey.
Right. So one has to come down to a topic which can be widely covered, but yes, a niche topic. Great. Thank you so much, guys, for your insights on that.
Somebody asked in the questions, it looks like Kanita said, do we really need to master certain skills or fields to start a podcast? And to an extent, yes, you need to master you need to have something that you are almost borderline an expert in, to know that I'm somebody that can and should speak about this on a topic, or on a podcast. Right.
I hope you got your answer. So that actually comes to my next question again. How to draw design values and, be unique to stand out in the world of podcasts. Bruce, you can take up the question.
I'm sorry, can you repeat it?
How to draw design values and be unique in the world and stand out in the world of podcasts.
Well, I think, as Tizer said, we're all going to be unique, just in the sense that, as he said, the three of us as podcasters, you could give us all the same topic and we're all going to have something different to say about it. I think it's really a case of, what do you bring to it that does kind of make you unique? So, like I said, in my case, with my Now Hear This Entertainment podcast, what I'm bringing to it is the fact that I work with artists. And so I can share with listeners, especially those who are up and coming performers, that I know their pain points. And I can say, I went through this with a particular client, or I did this for a client, and here's the solution. Here are some best practices. So you really do have to bring something unique to it. If you're someone who's just going to launch a podcast because, I'll go back to the sports example, because you're a sports fan, that's okay. I'm not discouraging you from doing it, but the example is, why am I really going to be interested in what you have to say as someone who's just a sports fan that just wants to comment on your team or the league that you follow? Because unless, unfortunately, you're a Hollywood celebrity, no one's going to know who you are. And so it's going to be very hard to get noticed in the podcast world, where so many people are trying to get the attention of listeners, that you're going to have something that really, really draws their attention and helps you stand out.
Absolutely. Paul?
I think, two things come to mind. One is, when we're talking about design values, two things that really stand out for me is, when I'm choosing what podcast I'm going to listen to, I actually do look at the cover art, right? Because, if I hear about a show, this is terrible, right? You're never supposed to judge a book by its cover, but we totally do that, right? And same thing with a podcast. I totally judge a podcast by its cover art. And that's really unfortunate. But it's like trying to sample, I'm going to spend 10 minutes listening to a podcast instead if I will. No, no one's going to do that, right? And so it's sort of sad, but it's true, because we'll take a look at podcast cover art and we'll subconsciously make this decision, I can tell that the cover art looks pretty lame. And so therefore, if the person didn't care enough to make really good art or pay for it to be made, then probably the production values of the show are pretty lame also, right? And I'll totally make that judgment call. So, I think that's where a service like Designhill is great, because then, you want to find some really great cover art. I had a friend, in fact, I'm trying to look for a sample here. This is one of our podcast episode cards. So I had a friend, wow, this is not really working really good. I had a friend, I'm not sure if that's working well there. Let's see here. I had a friend who designed our podcast logo. And then we tried to drop that into our podcast artwork, and it wasn't really working really well. And that's still a struggle that we're having even right now. And so, we've experimented with trying to have multiple designers, trying to work on the artwork together and stuff like that. So that's something that we're still trying to work through. But one area that I do feel really confident that Compelled is doing really well is superior audio quality. So like I mentioned, again, there's so many shows to choose from. And so if your show can just simply stand out by having better audio quality, and you have 10 other competitors that are in the exact same niche or whatever, but their audio quality is worse, your show will naturally rise to the top as long as all other metrics are the same. So that's one area I would encourage everyone. It is possible to have better audio by just investing in a really nice mic for yourself. And then when you record your audio, instead of recording audio through Zoom, because the audio quality is pretty bad, I would use a service like Fireside or Zencastr, which actually records your guest audio on their local computer and then synchronizes it in the cloud later on, instead of trying to record the audio via Zoom in real time. That is a bad situation for really bad audio. So the two services, and again, I'll drop these in the chat, is fireside.fm or zencastr.com, and I'll drop these in the chat right now. Tizer, I'll toss it to you, man.
Tizer, please.
Yeah, I've struggled with that. Just making sure that the right I've gone through, I think, 3 or 4 now at this point. And I finally, what I had to do was kind of look at, okay, well, what's my goal? What am I using social media for? And so I brought that into my design for my logo cover or the podcast cover. And so if you look at if you go to my website versus my podcast cover, or you go to my Instagram page or even my LinkedIn profile page, you're going to see a common theme with my branded content. And so I wanted it to be recognizable and identifiable. For me, it was, I've got a face for radio, so I don't know that I should have put it on my podcast cover. But I just wanted to, I just said, hey, this is who I am. I wanted to seem like I'm a guy you'd want to have a beer with, and we're going to sit down and talk about sales. So that was kind of my objective. It'll probably change. I don't own a jet yet, so I couldn't post one of those as a podcast cover. But I think that there's no wrong way to do it. As long as you're constantly, Paul was talking about analyzing, looking, can I get better? Is it resonating? And making sure it's consistent with themes and colors across all of your platforms.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. There's a similar. There's a question in the questions tab, Paul. There, I'm making that question live. Do you have suggestions for audio equipment to use that you have personally utilized?
Yeah. It's kind of this weird thing where it's you get what you pay for, right? So if you oh, I want something really cheap. Well, guess what? It's gonna sound really cheap too. Now there is this kind of this perfective, we got to find you don't want something too expensive but too cheap. So at least for me, I bought I believe it's called the Shure SM57, and it's normally like an $80 microphone. I bought it for $40 off of eBay. There was a sale on them, and I bought 3 of them, one for me, one the guests. And so that's what I personally record with. And I have a very small mobile setup, so that way I can actually pack it all into bags and then travel to where my guests are and record them. I know there's these really fancy $2,000 mics, and those are great if you can afford those. But another tip I'll give you, and I wish I had my equipment pulled out here, I don't at the moment, is to get it's like a spring-loaded device to stick your microphone into. In fact, Tizer, maybe you have one. I think I saw one in the background, maybe, but you can stick your microphone into it. Yeah, right there. So you see, it's spring-loaded. Turn that around so they can see it. So there's these little rubber bands that kind of keep the thing in place so it doesn't get all messed up. And that is really nice, because inevitably your guests are going to end up bumping into the table, or you're going to bump into the table. And then the other thing that Tizer has there is called a spit filter. I'll let Tizer speak to that. But I will also drop another link in a call to action here, because I actually have a little web page on my website with the list of audio equipment that I personally have used, and I link to everything on Amazon, and you can go and see what I'm using and see if that's helpful for you or not. So I'll drop that in the CTA in a second here.
Sure, Paul. So, all right, guys, I hope everyone is enjoying the session. Very, very insightful session on podcast. So, guys, before we move forward, I would like to give a quick shout out to Designhill, world's leading creative marketplace, for organizing this event. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back to hear more from our panelists.
Clarematics is a full-service video agency based around video production. We created a brand that fit our identity at the time, but as we've evolved as a company, we found that original brand didn't quite fit our aspirations anymore. Finding a partner to rebrand your entire company takes a lot of time and effort. Finding Designhill was an incredible lifeline. Designhill offers a money-back guarantee. If we don't like any of the designs, we get all of our money back. The stuff that we ended up with were well beyond what we had been seeing on other creative services platforms. After creating a simple design brief by answering some questions created by Designhill, we posted, and within a few days, we had over 250 entries. Designhill's platform made it easy to communicate with all of the potential designers. Eventually, we picked a winner. In addition to a logo, our designer also created a letterhead, business cards, and banners for all of our social media platforms. With Designhill's help, we now have a brand that meets our aspirations. We're ready for the future and everything that it's here to bring.
All right, so here we are back again, and let's continue the session. So my next question goes on to Tizer. Thank you, Paul, for sharing your resource. My next question is for Tizer. How do you think brands can leverage podcasts to meet the changing market landscape?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's something that's going to become more and more relevant. I think you can look at it from two ways, or several different ways. One, it's a great way to be able to tell your story to your customers, and for them to actually be able to hear it, right, from your perspective. A lot of times the story is coming through our salespeople, and not all salespeople are great salespeople, right? And so maybe they're not always going to convey the message how you'd like to convey. I think it's also a great way to bring in prospects that you normally wouldn't be able to get to pick up the phone. I know that I typically work a lot with insurance brokers. Sometimes they're very hard to get a hold of. Using a podcast as a way to be able to ask them as a authority leader or an expert in their field questions, you're able to establish a 45-minute, hour session, half-hour session to build rapport, which then in turn, when the podcast is done, may actually lead to business. And I think the last thing that it could really help is, depending on the size and scope of your organization, the last company I worked for, we had 70,000 employees, right? That's a lot of people that you need to convey a message to. Even right now, the company that I work for, we service and represent over 500,000 people. And so when you're trying to communicate to either internally or the people that you're servicing, having a podcast that you can send out internal messages, right? It doesn't have to be leveraged as a way to make money, but it's an easy way to send a message out to all of your employees with different directives or different things going on within an organization. So I think there's a lot of different facets it could be used for.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, you want to add on? How can brands leverage podcasts?
I think I would go back to that whole trifecta of trying to find podcast gold, that link I shared earlier. Again, I don't think you should try to make it too on the nose. I would also recommend listening to some other shows that have done branded podcasts. One that comes to mind right now is Gimlet Media. So Gimlet was recently purchased by Spotify, but Gimlet's been responsible for creating some really great shows like Startup Podcast, I'm blanking on The Pitch, some really great shows. But they've also created branded podcasts where it was subtly branded to try to help a particular advertiser. And so one of them, I think, is called Open for Business. And that was a podcast that they created for eBay. But again, they try to do it in a very tasteful manner so that people left with a positive impression about eBay. But not every single episode was about eBay, right? They were finding content that was relevant for people that would be interested in eBay. So, right, it was content that was relevant to the avatar, the customer avatar, but it didn't have to be like straight up on the nose. Because again, blatant self-promotion is very see-through. Anyone can tell when you're blatantly self-promoting your own self, right? And so instead, a more subtle way is to try to be very subtle. Again, like think about Pixar movies, right? Pixar movies carry a great message, right? A great, like there's one called Onward that just came out, and it was a great message about like family and like your brotherhood and stuff like this. But if they had tried to make a movie that was like overtly about like family is important like that, people would have been really turned off. So instead they packaged it into a great adventure, something that was really fun, and there was a storyline, it was lots of fun, but it still carried a great message in the end. So again, I really encourage you listen to some other shows for some samples.
Absolutely, right. Build it around. Bruce, you would like to add something to this?
Yeah, I was glad that Paul was saying that, because that's what I was going to jump in with, is that if you're a brand and you say, oh, podcasting is so popular, this will be a great way to get our product out in front of everybody. If you just come on there and sell every episode, people are going to say, this is just one big long commercial. I don't want to listen to this. So you can kind of talk around it, or, as Tizer was saying before, like maybe listen to what salespeople are saying, or listen to what insurance people are saying. So you're kind of talking around the product without saying, we want you to buy this, we want you to buy this. With my Now Hear This Entertainment podcast, I wanted people to know that I manage and promote artists, but I didn't want to come on there every week and say, I manage and promote artists, and this is how you can hire me. It's just kind of, people are going to listen to you, and they're going to know, like, and trust, as they say, and they're going to say, this sounds like someone that I would like to do business with. I wonder if he could, in my case, I wonder if he could manage and promote me from across the miles, and they'll get in touch. Or if they really want your product, whatever it is, if you're an author, you don't have to say, my book is called this, and this is where you can get it. Maybe at the very end you can say that, but again, people will find it on your website. You can just have organic conversations where you say, in fact, in chapter 3 of my book, I talked about how XYZ, and you're not going to say, in chapter 3 of my book, which is called this, and which is available here, and this is the price, and this is how, and these are the forms of payment that we take. People will find it if they really want it.
Absolutely right. So that actually again gets me to my next question, my next set, which says the rise of, everyone knows that the rise of podcasts continues to be an ongoing trend in the in the competitive market space right now. So give us tips how brands can create authentic engagement with their customers and audiences through podcast. How to create authentic engagement.
Yeah, I think it's being honest with people and just letting them hear. I think people really want to know. People want it to seem very relatable, and so the minute you start making it really commercial, real high level, something that people can't relate to, they're going to say, "This isn't for me," and you're almost going to make them feel bad about themselves. That it's almost as though you're talking down to them. So you want to just meet them where they are. And you want to talk about what this is and have them in mind without coming right out and saying, this is how it relates to you, or this is how it could benefit you. Just design those conversations, like earlier in this webinar when we were talking about creating content in advance and planning it out and scheduling it. You want to plan those episodes and say, okay, what can we tell people that they're going to, and I, every once in a while on my Now Hear This Entertainment podcast, I to a guest. There are people listening right now who are aspiring performers, and you're sitting here talking about performing with this person and opening up for this person and going on this multi-city tour. How are you getting these opportunities? And I will say, be specific. Like, let them know, are there resources out there that they maybe should be using? Because that's what the listener wants to hear, is something authentic where they say, I'm getting benefit from this. Not, boy, I think these people are just trying to sell me something.
Right. So authentic, honest content planning, these are the key takeaways. Tizer, would you like to add something to this?
I would just echo everything that Bruce just said. I have a real potty mouth. And so but I don't steer away from that. And I've had a lot of people tell me I shouldn't. And I'm just like, hey, that's just me. I just don't care. And so I'm always going to be authentically me. Again, with mine, I like to I'm kind of more like the Joe Rogan style, especially when I do an interview. I'm going to let it roll, and I tell my guests that. I'm like, hey man, unless you your brain completely shuts down for like 5 minutes, like we're just going to roll through it. And I want people to hear an organic conversation. And so even with me, when I'm planning stuff, yes, of course, I have done my homework and I know who I'm talking to and I have questions listed out. But 90% of the time, I don't ask any questions I even wrote out. It's a free-flowing, organic conversation. And that's just personally what's helped me grow, is just because I'm always myself. I'm having a casual conversation, and I'm trying to draw out as much value because I'm interested. And I'm hoping that the people listening are interested in the same way, and they're going to be able to relate to it. And I think that's just to help me just always be myself. And so you might get some F-bombs if you listen to mine. So I apologize, but I'm just keeping it real.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Perfect. So since we are actually running out of time, and I would just rush through the panel discussion here, my next question goes to Paul. Paul, iTunes is responsible for as much as 70% of podcast usage and downloads. How do you think keeping iTunes in the center is the key channel for growth and attention?
Okay, so actually, I would disagree with this statement. I'm just going to be super. So Spotify, there's a lot of research, and I've been reading a lot of this research for the last little bit. So Spotify is starting to gain a lot of momentum and steam, and iTunes is actually starting to lose a lot of momentum.
Okay.
Now, the podcasting landscape is still super stratified, so there's tons of platforms, and iTunes is still the dominant player, but it's a slow and dominant player. So I think the same way that Internet Explorer used to be the big dog and Chrome was like a startup, but then slowly they changed positions. Well, that's going on right now, this very moment. So you still need to pay attention to iTunes, but also pay attention to the other platforms as well. So I would encourage everyone to make sure that you diversify your platforms, that when you launch a podcast, you launch it on all the platforms that are out there. If someone else is answering this question, I'll go and drop another call to action link in the to a place where you can try to submit to a whole bunch of different podcast hosts at the same time. So yeah, launch everywhere, not just iTunes. Concentrate everywhere.
Great. So that actually comes down to another question which I have on my list. Do also share the right platforms to showcase podcast portfolios for consistent work. Adding on to these questions, Tizer.
Yeah, thank you. So I think you're going to have to meet your audience where there's at. I'm really big on Instagram, so I post there frequently. But mine also is business related content, so I'll post on LinkedIn. I'm not very active on Twitter, just because I don't think it really relates to what I'm trying to put out there. So I have a Twitter account to have one, and I shove it through my Instagram. But I don't really engage that much. So I say, understand where your audience is, go there with your content, right, would probably make the most sense.
Right, absolutely. Bruce, you want to add down something to this? Any recommendations for the right platforms?
Yeah, I'll take the flip side of that. Instead of social media, and I'm going to share a document also so that people can go and look and see what I'm talking about. But, iTunes kind of is the big dog, Apple Podcasts. So you certainly want to quote unquote feature them, at least kind of list them first, if nothing else, and Spotify right behind them. But I think what's important is I'm very old fashioned, and on both of my podcasts, I'm always trying to drive traffic to my podcast website. But then when people land there, I give them options so that they can listen right there, but I also show them a handful of logos so that they know they can get it on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, et cetera, Google Podcasts, and I give them a short list. But in this document that I'm going to share with everybody, I want you to go, those of you who are watching this, and look especially at my Catholic Sports Radio website, but at the Now Hear This Entertainment podcast website as well, because you'll see that I give a whole long page where I give links to so many different platforms where you can listen, because what I'll also do is I recognize that there's some people that just really have their favorite app that they love to listen to podcasts through, and I want them to think, well, he doesn't have this one on there, so I guess his show isn't there. So getting back to what Tizer was saying, in my Instagram posting in particular, I will make sure that I tell people, or just search for Now Hear This Entertainment wherever you listen to podcasts, or just search for Catholic Sports Radio wherever you listen to podcasts. That way, if they don't see the logo or the link, I don't want them to think it must not be on there. They're going to say, oh, wait, he said I can just look. And so they're going to right away pull up whatever their favorite app is. And chances are that because of what Paul was saying, there's going to be a strong likelihood that it's already been submitted to whichever one they're probably looking for. So I'll upload that document, but I'll let you continue.
Right. Thank you so much, guys, for such amazing, insightful session here. I have another question in my mind about the length, about the day, about the frequency of the podcast content. So when it comes to podcasting, what should be the ideal length, the day, and the frequency for the podcast content to drive better engagement?
I would say, oh, go ahead, Bruce.
I just want to say real quick, and then I'll let you take from here. The ideal length in terms of the running time of your podcast is, once you're talking just for the sake of talking, now your podcast is too long. So don't let anyone tell you that the ideal podcast length is 22 minutes, because if it only takes you 5 minutes to get out great content, then I guess 5 minutes. There's someone that I'm working with right now, someone that I'm coaching that's about to start a podcast, and I've told her, plan out your first 10, 12, 15 episodes, but also figure out what you're going to talk about so that you kind of get an idea of like, okay, I guess it looks like it's only going to take me about 13 minutes per. I mean, mine Now Hear This Entertainment episodes are 45, 50, 55 minutes. My Catholic Sports Radio episodes are maybe 25 or 30. So don't let anybody tell you there's a hard and fast rule of how long it has to be. Like I said before, once you're talking just for the sake of talking, now your podcast is too long. But go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, so the thing I would say is that shorter is typically better. So that's just a good rule of thumb, especially as you're starting out, because no one wants to listen to someone ramble on, right? And the second thing I was to say is a big key is to post consistently. So if you're going to be a weekly show, then post every single week on the same day. Don't make it like, oh, this week is a Saturday, and like, oh, 10 days later, whatever. And if you're going to be a seasonal podcast, then be very upfront about that and be like, hey, every episode. So like, hey, you're listening to season whatever. And at the end of the season, you could say like, hey, the season is now over. And the last thing I would say is to make sure that you avoid releasing around holidays. So if you have a seasonal model, don't release during Christmas or Thanksgiving, right? Just like take the time off. Or if you have a weekly podcast, just know that don't release your best stuff right during the holiday. Like release something that's not as good and that you knew that was not going to perform as well. So just tips from my own personal experience.
All right, thank you so much, Paul. Guys, Bruce is sharing down something on the screen. You guys can take out links from there. Any which ways, the Bruce social media handles will be in the chat section there. Robin, being our moderator, will be sharing all his handles there, and you guys can check it out. So yeah, great. Thank you, Paul, for your insights. This would probably be my second last question to everyone: how to measure the right ROI for a successful podcast show? Pretty important question, and I think most of the people in the audiences would like to know this. So yeah, let's start with Tizer.
Again, it's a great question. I think it's very subjective. What are your goals, right?
Yeah.
I don't need the money, so I don't care if I make any, so that's just simple with me. It's really, for me, it's about serving, it's about giving. And so that's what I've made the podcasting about for me. I've met people from all over the world. I've had incredible connections, which has related and it has turned into money consequently, but it was just a byproduct of me just wanting to serve. I looked at where I was 10 years ago with my life and my trajectory. I wasn't making money. I was lost. I was confused. I didn't know anything about sales. And I figured that out. And, now I've won lots of awards and done some stuff. And so I wanted to be able to give that info back and bring on people that could give that info back. So that was really my objective. That's not going to be everybody's story. Hey, if somebody wants to toss me some cash today to throw an ad on there, maybe I will. But So far, I've steered away from that, and the people that have been interested, I've declined their offers. So I'm probably not the best person on the ROI piece.
Paul, would you like to add on to this?
Yeah, I would say, ROI doesn't have to be money. So like, even though Tizer says he's not the best on the money piece, but again, I bet you've had incredible return though, right? Like what you were just mentioning, the relationships that you've built.
Totally.
At least for me with Compelled, when we launched it, it wasn't going to be a moneymaker. Like we knew that at the get-go, like, hey, we're not going to make money from this for a long time. So it had to be something that we felt passionate about. And for me, 3 huge returns that I've received, I think Tizer even mentioned these. One is that it was an ability to kind of establish myself as a thought leader. Secondly, I got to meet these really cool people with these really powerful stories that I've read about in the news, right? And these are like world changers, right? Some of these people have been through incredible experiences, and under no other circumstances would I be able to like contact a random stranger and be like, "Hey, you're famous. I want to spend an hour talking with you and picking your brain." But if I say, "Oh, I have a podcast, I'd like to spend an hour with you picking your brain," they'll be like, "Oh yeah, sure." And so then I get to sit down face to face with someone that normally under no other context would I be able to glean all this wisdom from them. But instead I can, because I have a podcast. And it's just incredible, right? It's like I can ask them any question I feel like. That's astounding, right? So that's been a huge return for me. And the third thing is developing an audience. So I have been developing an audience that hopefully, as the future moves on, as I have future projects or podcasts or products that I want to launch in the future, I already have this built-in audience of people that trust me, they know me, they respect me, and they'll be the first people that I can go to and talk about, like, hey, here's this new thing I'm working on.
Yeah, right. Bruce, would you like to add something to this?
Yeah, I would, because I think when you hear ROI, people think of, are you monetizing your podcast? And then they simply focus only on, do you have sponsors? And there's so many ways that you can monetize your podcast that you can't say, well, my ROI isn't very good because I don't have a lot of sponsors for it. I mean, in my case, I mentioned a few minutes ago, a young lady that I'm coaching right now who's going to start a podcast. Well, if people are paying me to coach them to start a podcast, doesn't that mean that I'm monetizing it? And if you get booked as a speaker to be part of an event, well, aren't you monetizing your podcast? Because Catholic Sports Radio podcast, people who are donating to that because it's kind of a ministry for me. And people say, oh, so you're monetizing it. It's like, I'm really just trying to cover my costs is all. Tizer said before that he's not really in it for the money. So it really just depends on kind of what your goal is with this, and look for different ways. I mean, it might be affiliates. It might be, I had gotten hired by a company one time to do a podcast for them, because they said, well, you're the podcast expert, we're not. And to me, that's me monetizing my podcast, because if my podcast wasn't as successful as it is, they wouldn't have hired me to do a podcast for them. So there's a lot of different ways that you can sit back and say, yeah, I am getting a return on my investment.
So guys, it's not always about money. It's about some certain things other than money too. So great. Thank you guys. And this would be my last question to our panelists. Share some experiences of where you wished that the podcast show you hosted had done something different. If you were to do it over, what would you change? Let me start with Paul.
If I was doing it all over again, I wish that I had realized it was going to take more time than I expected it would. And that's just me being super honest, right? Like, so if you sit down and think like, okay, this is how much time I think it's going to take, probably triple that number, and it's going to be the more accurate figure to really guess it. And I just think that's true. So that's what I wish I'd done when I started out.
Right, absolutely. Tizer, you want to add down your experience?
Yeah, that was, Paul, you're right on about that. I was like, just rip the file, upload it. What's the big deal? Right now, to create something of quality and value, it's going to take a lot of time. I think for me, the big part was the first year, I kind of had in the mentality, and I still do to some extent, is that I just didn't really care if everybody was finding or listening, right? But because I had that mentality, I wasn't as consistent as I should have been. It was really like, I'll upload when I want to upload. And in the last 2 years, I really have taken it serious, and I post every Monday and Thursday. at 6 a.m. Central Standard Time without fail, right? And I'll usually bulk, and I have stuff scheduled all the way through November now. And I wish I would have done that the first year as I got up and going, because I would have had a much better engagement, and my following would have been a lot bigger now had I tackled it a lot more consistently in my first 12 months.
Right. Bruce, any of your experiences which you would like to change?
Yes. When I first started my Now Hear This Entertainment podcast, I was going to a recording studio to do that every week. And what happened as a result was I just kind of got comfortable being the talent. And I never spent time at the studio asking them to show me all the different facets that were involved in the actual production of it. And so then when it came time for me to take it over and do all the production myself, Tizer and I are alike in this regard, that I do everything myself, all the recording, all the post-production, interviews, booking the guests, you name it, it's all me. And that's for both Now Hear This Entertainment and for Catholic Sports Radio. And so when all of a sudden it came time for me to do it all myself, I thought, well, I better learn this awfully fast, because as you've heard me say, I've never missed a week. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to keep delivering a new episode on time every week, I all of a sudden have to figure out how to do this all on my own. So I would kind of encourage people that you don't want to put off starting a podcast until everything is perfect, because you'll never do it. You'll never start it. But at the same time, start thinking about, okay, can I afford to go to a recording studio? And if so, that'll get me out faster. But number two, how can I learn from them along the way, or maybe be learning at home so that I can take it over faster and do it on my own? Because what happens when you go to a recording studio is they say, okay, you can come every Thursday at 3 o'clock to record your podcast. And all of a sudden you get a guest who says, if you can do it Tuesday night at 7, then I'll be on your show. If not, sorry, and then you miss out. So it's really better to be self-sufficient in that regard, as long as you know what you're doing. That's the difficult part.
Yeah, right. Oh, what an insightful session. So while I was just going through the questions tab, I found this one question, which is on your screen. Hi, be proud to join this meeting. I would like to ask how to manage when the speaker's speech and the listener records as well, and also give the best gesture.
I think this is what Paul was talking about before. Paul, if you want to maybe repeat, maybe this person came on late, about you were talking about.
Sure. Yeah, I think if the question is like, how is to best portray yourself when you're speaking, right? And so I think that's to like make sure you smile when you're speaking, and you use your hands to speak with. And so just be very genuine, and you talking with your hands helps kind of free you up to speak. Another tip I'd give you is that if you're trying to figure out how to record your guest, what software that you should use, I dropped it in the chat earlier, but there's 2 services I'd recommend, either Zencastr or Riverside.fm. And those services, when you record, your audio is being recorded onto your computer and your guest audio is being recorded onto their computer. And then both files are synchronized into the cloud later on. All too often, beginning podcasters try to record using Zoom or Skype. And what happens is the audio is being recorded on your computer, but then your guest audio is being transferred through the internet in real time and being sent to your computer and then trying to synchronize in real time. And what happens is that your guest audio gets all butchered up. It sounds bad because the quality is bad, because of limited internet connections, whatever. So don't record using Zoom or Skype. Use Riverside.fm or Zencastr. Those are the 2 services I strongly recommend you to use. Bruce, it sounds like you got a comment.
I think I would also tack on to that because we're talking about doing this from the standpoint of an audio podcast, if you're doing a podcast, meaning a YouTube show, then yes, you do very much want to be conscious of the fact that you could ask your guest a question as they're talking. You don't want to be looking down or busy doing something else, because unless you're going to edit it in such a way that people can't see what you're doing, if you're going like this, people are going to say, wow, they look really bored. So you do have to be conscious of the fact that sit up straight, look happy, seem really engaged with what the person's saying, ask good follow-up questions, and let them see that you're only concentrating on doing that interview right at that time and not distracted by other things.
Absolutely right. So I hope, Erdi, your question is answered. So, all right, guys, this brings us to the end of this wonderful session with Paul, Bruce, and Tizer. This was indeed a value-packed session, and I hope everyone enjoyed the discussion, because I personally did. So this topic was completely new to me, and while I was working on this topic, I realized this is such an interesting and wide topic to cover. So thank you so much, guys. Your pointers were so insightful for me too. So once again, I would like to thank each one of you for taking out time for this event. And anyone wants to say anything? Paul, Bruce, Tizer, anything you guys want to add on to?
Sure, Shambhavi, thank you for letting me join. Really appreciate it. I'd encourage everyone to go listen to my podcast if they just want to hear a sample of the type of production standards that we have. And I think we dropped the URL in there, but again, it's compelledpodcast.com.
I would definitely check out all the links you guys have shared, all the resources there, and I would definitely come back to the podcast, and I would start listening to Paul and Bruce and Tizer. Check out your links there. Thank you so much, guys. And all right, guys, so this is not where it ends. We have a lot more events lined up for you in the coming days. So if you guys are interested and haven't registered yet, I'm putting the link of our events section in the chat section on the right, where you can find all our upcoming events, and also you can find the recording of this particular event, and you can register. To stay updated with events like these, you can follow us on our LinkedIn profile. You can also give us suggestions on topics which you would want us to cover. I'm also dropping the LinkedIn section link in the chat. To watch this session, you can check out our events page. Also, you can check out our YouTube channel. The link will be in the chat section. For all the designer and artists who are listening to this and wish to be a part of this such a thriving community, visit designhill.com. And on that note, I would like to say a bye to each one of you who joined us today here. Thank you, guys. Take care and stay safe.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.